I wanted to invite the magic to this. And, I say it in those terms because I lack a lot of terms. Really, I just want God to show up. I mean, that's really what everything is about, right? Is when God shows up. This was so much bigger than me in every way. I had practiced some things, hard things, big things. I was in charge of all my grandmother's estate and all of her affairs for the last 14 years of her life and beyond. So I had some practice before everything happened with Dan. But through this process, I don't know. First, I learned it in the crisis, right? This idea of abiding, that I could not make decisions. I mean, I talk about it in the book a minute, that somebody said to me, geez, Jen, like, what are you going to do? I'm like, what are you going to do? And I just laughed out loud. I thought, are you kidding me right now? Like, what am I going to do? Nothing. I'm going to do whatever the next thing is in front of me. Like, this is so far. I said, man, I'm going to let it roll. Like, I got to this is bigger. I'm going to accept whatever is. And I feel like I had to learn that in the crisis and the dealing with the crisis. I think that was the lesson of grief. I think that's, you had to learn it is not about predictability. It is not about your idea of what the future was or your idea of what your life is about. You are not the boss of these things. And then those themes started getting drilled down even further in even smaller ways, right? This book, for example, I was referred to this book, How the Light Gets In, which I mentioned previous with Pat Schneider. And I just want to read the journal entry preface of this from this book, Pat Schneider, How the Light Gets In. This time I want to find my way, explore my way, take my time. I want more than I've ever asked of myself before. Maybe it requires a silence and a centering that I've not yet, in my whole life, really given myself. I'm not after poems this time. I'm not out to teach either. I want to go for the big one, the presence with a capital P, the mystery, the beloved. I want to explore, go into the cave, go up against the wall, go all the way. And there's nothing that does not act as a door if I open it. The presence is mystery. It is breath. It breathes, and I feel its breath on my hand as I write the words. This time I want to go for the big one. That spoke to me so much for this project. It was so ultimately the truth that this process had to be me, my subconscious, and God sitting down together to commune over what had happened. And that's how I approached this writing. And I used Pat Schneider's methodology as a tool. And, I was a bit skeptical at first, but I really loved this book because she was in her 70s when she wrote it. She had done many, many years of writing circles and so forth. And this is a methodology that she taught. And I loved this book because she explains her theories and her methodology, and then she has examples from her own writing where she has done it for herself. And so you got to see that process. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. And I tried that, and it worked for me. And I remember, and I'll talk about this more later, but I remember the first time that I really knew that I sat down and I wrote something. It's the best work of my life. I wrote something that I did not know about my own relationship of 40 years with Dan. I did not know it before I sat down in that chair to write that. I know that it was myself, my subconscious, and God communing in that situation. And what I wrote, I learned something about my own 40-year relationship that I did not previously know. I could have never said on my own. I thought I knew all of there was to know about that relationship. I knew all of the history. We had so much history and so much memory and so much documentation and mementos from those things. I thought there's nothing else I can learn here, except for I did. And then I really wanted that same experience to come into the paintings. I wanted to be organized and have a framework. And I have a spreadsheet here, actually, of the paintings. Like, I knew which poems were going to get paintings. There were some poems that were just so important to me. I knew I would end up painting alongside of that there's more to express, that words just don't, they're just not sufficient. They just don't cover it. So I knew that I would have some paintings along with certain poems. And I had vibes for those paintings. Like maybe I knew what the reference material was, or the energy level, or maybe the color palette, or maybe the tools that I wanted to use for that particular painting. I have no idea how any of the paintings were going to look. Not a single clue about what they were going to turn into. But I had documented and thought through, like, what are these paintings about? And some of them had names ahead of time and some of them had names after. And, just what was going on, this documentation process. It took me about, I don't know, maybe a couple, 3 years to really craft this spreadsheet over time before I could actually sit down and start painting. But then I did sit down and start painting. And I remember the first painting where I was like, oh, God showed up. Oh my gosh, this whole thing about your stuff will come out in your art. And I've always believed that to be true. And I knew that it was true on some level, but such a profound experience to start painting. And I just had little things about, the things that the paint was doing. I was like, gosh, I really love what the paint is doing right there. And I really love this spot right here. And I really love this little detail right here. And just such juicy little things. And you have to edit that, right, as an artist. And I don't have any idea of what it's going to look like. So I'm just rolling with it. And I was attracted to draw this certain kind of line, and I only wanted that kind of line, but I've got too many lines going in the same angle, the same direction. I should probably edit that. But no, I couldn't cover it up. There were just things about that painting that over time, I just kept making these choices. I was slow with it. I'm a slow painter. I have to make a mark and then I have to sit down, and I have to make a mark and then I have to sit down for a while, or I mess everything up. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, I wish I could cut half this painting off. Half this painting is really great, and I'm not sure what's going on with the other half. And you got to push through. You got to work past the quote unquote ugly phase. And what the ugly phase is really, it's you just don't know what it is yet. And that's how life works too. There are times after crisis and when you're on this new path that things don't make sense yet. You don't know the path. There's all these threads out there. You got to follow them to see what's going to be next, And I followed the threads. I did the next thing and then the next thing. And then I'd let it sit and I'd do the next thing. And I let it sit and I'd do the next thing. And then finally I started feeling like it was done. Or close, very close. Maybe I was waiting for final marks, or maybe there'd be some big edit decisions later. But I felt like I'm going to stop. I'm at a stopping point. And that particular painting was the most profound experience of art I've probably ever had, where I really can tell you, God, my subconscious, and myself painted that. And that's what I think typifies what is the art of this project. The art of this project is letting those mysterious things unfold and really bring an invitation to work at it, to produce something that is the best of what I can produce. It is to have that magic. I mean, God has to be present in this for me to feel like this is the very best that I can do with the skills that I have in this time of my life. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not about perfection for me. It's not about chasing what I think it should look like or what I think it should be. But it is about being diligent to the work and elevating the work to the very highest that I can produce at this time. That will feel like wild success to me in this project. This feels like a culmination of all of the effort, of all of the work that I have put into my grief and my experience and everything that happened. It is my way of honoring him. Dan was an artist in every way. He was a musician. He was a songwriter. He was a poet. He was also a visual artist, which not very many people realize. And the thing that was his greatest regret in his life was the fact that he had all of this genius, and it truly was genius, but he didn't ever push it to the point of finished. You need to make a thing. The idea of a thing is not enough. The creativity around a thing is not enough. It has to go all the way to you can have a thing in your hand. And only then, a thing is better than no thing. And that's what I learned from him. I think his legacy to me is about producing things. And, I've done things like My photography. I have made books of my photography. I take pictures a lot. In fact, people who are in my very intimate, most intimate of prayer lists, I send them photos from wherever I am when I'm praying for them. So they know I don't have to tell them I'm praying for them. I just send them a little photo of wherever I am. And a lot of those photos have made it into little books that I've made or gifts or things of that nature, because you have to make it a thing. You have to document what you create. And that spark of creativity that I believe that creativity is the mark of God on humankind. And I think this is about co-creating with God. I think this is what we are called to do as human beings, is create. And that means produce. And so it's taken me a long time. It's taken me a lot of effort to produce this. But you can't process grief and produce at the same time, or maybe you can. I'm not sure. But this was just the way that I could do it. It was the way, it was the time. I promised myself I wouldn't rush, but I haven't allowed myself to stay stuck either. And there have been periods of being stuck. I spent a year being stuck. One minor thing happens and it sucks the creative life right out of me. And I'm, basically essentially quote unquote on the couch for a year. Those things paralyzed my work. And I started to realize that it was my responsibility to protect my creative energy through this. Protect my creative energy. And that I was never going to be able to produce this to the degree that I would want. And it was important to me. This is a project that has sustained my interest for years now. The work of grief, the work of loss, the work of crisis. I feel like all of that, and distilling that down into what is the value of all of that work. What is the benefit to all of that work? What is the positive end of all of that? Because I just believe there has to be a positive end, or what is the point? What is the purpose of that kind of suffering? And I think there are just gifts to be had through suffering. And you can't just manufacture that. So I wanted to pay a lot of attention. And I think that was my prayer all the way through is, this is so important. Let me always pay attention. Pay attention. Watch, listen, learn. Don't miss those opportunities. They're important.